Well, hello. In this video, you are going to learn 10 tips for leading worship in a small church. And of course, this is a live stream. I love doing live stream with you guys. And today I have a special guest, my friend Spencer Cormany. He's the founder of Leading Worship Well. He has an amazing Instagram account that shares daily worship leading tips. I kind of view it as like a daily micro blog for worship leaders. So you're going to want to check that out at Leading Worship Well. I have his Instagram handle down in the description. And Spencer and I both lead worship at smaller churches. I'm at a church plant that's about 50 to 60 adults on a Sunday. And Spencer, you can tell us a little bit more about your church in a moment here as well. But we just have a passion for helping equip worship leaders like you guys serving at small churches, just like we are, because it has its own set of unique challenges. So Spencer, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll get going here.
Yeah, my name is Spencer Cormany. I run an Instagram page and website called Leading Worship Well, and every day I post a couple practical tips about leading worship. So I've been doing that for about 6.5 months now, and it's been a good journey so far. For me, I am a worship leader in a small church. I lead worship at Merge Community Church in South Central Pennsylvania. I've been doing that. I've been on staff for 3 years now, and I love talking to other small church worship leaders like you, Jake. So I'm excited to get into these tips.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, as you guys tune into this live stream, please let us know where you're watching from in the comments. I already saw Aiden. What's up, Aiden? What's up, Tony? What's up, Mario? So glad you guys are here with us. So let us know where you're watching from. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We really want this to have some interaction here. We don't want this to just be Spencer and I talking the whole time. And then if you have any questions about worship ministry, whether it's worship or tech or leadership, please let us know in the comments, because towards the end, once we've made it through the 10 tips, we're going to be doing a live Q&A session. So I think with that said, I think that covers all of our housekeeping up front here, Spencer. So let's go ahead and dive into the 10 tips for leading worship at a small church. So Spencer will take it away with tip number 1.
Sounds good. Well, we wanted to talk about small church worship leading because statistics show that 90% of churches are under 200 people. So that probably also means that 90% of worship leaders lead worship in a church under 200 people. So if that's you, we want you to know that you are not alone. You are not the minority. You are the majority, because 9 out of 10 worship leaders are in the same exact position as you. And we want to help you out today. So tip number 1 is to embrace the intimacy. It's all about, in those small church environments, it's a very intimate environment. And in fact, larger churches are actually trying to find ways that they can increase that intimacy that we have. You know, they've got stages, they've got lights, they've got a big band, and our advantage is that maybe it's just you and your acoustic guitar. So instead of seeing all the disadvantages, we want to see the advantage that we have, and one of those is intimacy. So we want to embrace that, and a couple ways you can do that is you can actually allow people to sing along with you and like really amp those sections up whenever you're leading worship. So step back from the mic. Everybody loves to sing with everybody else. Everybody loves those kumbaya moments. And then the other part is just like intimacy from a relational standpoint. You know people on a deeper level in a smaller church because there's less people to know, which means you have deeper relationships with people. So tip number 1 is to embrace the intimacy.
Great stuff there, Spencer. And I couldn't agree more just about the, I don't know, when you have that smaller community, the ability for you to connect with your team members, the ability for you to connect with your congregation member as well. It's a lot easier to do that than when you have a large sea of people. And of course it's great for us to have a lot of people at a church, but just don't forget the upside of having the smaller community there. And with that actually brings me to tip number 2, which is relationship comes before change. In my experience leading worship at smaller churches, often, I'm hired on staff, or even when I was just a volunteer worship leader in my first position, guys like me, you're watching this, you're similar to me, you have a vision for how things could become better, how you could implement changes in your worship ministry. Maybe it's introducing new music, maybe it's upgrading your technology in worship, maybe it's integrating a click and backing tracks for your worship band. But we have to be careful when it comes to implementing change. And this actually applies to whatever church you're in, whatever size, but it's really important to build strong relationships with your team members and with your congregation before you start going and changing a bunch of things in your worship ministry. And John Maxwell, he's a very well-known thought leader on leadership. It's kind of funny to think about. And he wrote this book called The 5 Levels of Leadership. I think it's the best, easiest framework for understanding good leadership. And he talks about how, we're given a position or we're given a title, but we need to go beyond that if we actually want to make anything happen. And the next step beyond just being given a title like worship leader is to actually build relationships with people in your ministry so that they trust you, they give you permission to lead them and to make change. So find intentional ways to just be with your people, whether they're on your team or in your congregation. Take them out to coffee, take them out to lunch, invite them over to your house. Get to know them before you try to make any change. So that's tip number 2. Relationship comes before change.
Yeah. Hey, it's good to see everyone joining in. If you just joined, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear that. Tip number 3 is to focus on the fundamentals. So whenever it comes to a small church, often that means that you have a small budget too. So you can't just go out and buy all the newest things. But what you can focus on is you can focus on learning the fundamentals. These are things that you don't have to buy. I always like to say on my posts, I always like to say that it's better to learn things than to buy things. I think that that's really important, and that should be encouraging in a small church, because you don't have to buy things to be really good. You can focus on the fundamentals, and some of those things are musicality. So just playing your instrument is an obvious one, but then also leading. How are you leading your church? What are you saying during transitions? How are you praying? How are you leading your team? These are all things that you can learn for free. Jake's always got good information on that. I've got information on that on my website. And you can learn these things. There's free information out there. You don't have to buy anything, and you can focus on the fundamentals. It doesn't take a budget. All you have to do is put in a little bit of time and learn. And then to take it one step further, whenever you do have a budget that's a little bit more and you can buy a digital board or in-ears, those fundamentals carry over into that new equipment. So tip number 3 is to focus on the fundamentals.
Want to remind you guys, as you're coming in, let us know where you're watching from. I get Michael from Massachusetts, Gus from Mexico, Lemuel from Connecticut, Jaron from India, Jake asked a question, and we'll get to your questions to the end after we get through the tips. So please ask questions. Thanks for asking that question, Jake. Kenneth from Atlanta, Luke from Denver. I think I know Luke. He plays drums in my worship band. So Luke, great to have you in the live stream, dude. Thanks, appreciate the support. So guys, we're on tip number 4, right? We just did tip number 3, focus on the fundamentals. Yep. So tip number 4. My turn. So my tip for number 4 is lead like you are actually leading at a larger church. So even though you're at a smaller church, doesn't mean you can't have the mindset like you are leading at a larger church. And I think this can manifest itself in a couple ways. It can really manifest itself well and help you out in your ministry if you create good systems for planning worship and keeping things organized, as well as communicating with your team. So use tools like Planning Center services. I actually have a video I'm going to publish tomorrow about all the benefits of Planning Center. And Planning Center is free if you have less than 5 people in your account. So there's really no financial excuse for not using software like Planning Center. You can use it if you're the smallest church with the smallest team, and I also know like Red Rocks Church. They're the mega church here in this area in Denver, and I've served there a couple times, and they use Planning Center, right? So it's a scalable software. So just because you're a smaller church doesn't mean you have to resort to just like text messaging or email or Google suite of apps for managing your team. I want to encourage you, use some tools that even bigger churches use. They're going to make your life easier. And as your church scales, you're going to be ready for that and have the systems in place for that. And then the other way you can really, lead like you are leading at a larger church is by developing other leaders under you. So try to make it so that not everything in your worship ministry hinges on you being there. Really develop out other team members to be able to lead worship, to be able to run the tech, just to be able to make things happen when you're not there. And that requires setting up systems and equipping and teaching others. Again, at my church, we're a small church plant, but this Sunday, I'm not going to be at church. I have a videography shoot, so I have to be away for this weekend, but my intern Ashton, he just graduated high school. He's going to be taking over prepping all the tracks in Ableton for this Sunday, and then we have another worship leader coming in to help out to fill my place, but Ashton is able to carry so much of the weight, and eventually he'll be able to pretty much run the whole show. So have that mindset that you're at a larger organization, start pouring into other people, and develop those systems that are going to scale with your worship ministry. That's tip number 4.
I love that. Yeah. I'm starting to build up another worship leader, and he's going to be leading with me for the first time this Wednesday at our midweek gathering. So that's really exciting. He's a high school kid, and it's not going to happen instantly, but you've got that safe space where he can step into. It's not a Sunday morning in front of a bunch of people. It's sort of a smaller environment. So I think that's a great way to build leaders. So yes, lead like you are at a large church. And tip number 5 is to also use what you have. You've got to know when good is good enough. So think about, the gear that you have, and don't think about stepping up to the next thing until you've fully utilized what you have. I told Jake this yesterday. We did a live stream a couple days ago on Instagram, and I told him that I run an analog board. And it's crazy, I know, but I feel like we haven't maxed out the capacity on that yet, at least for the sound guys. They're still learning how to EQ things. That's like 101 sound engineering. So until they learn that, they're not going to be able to utilize the full benefits of a digital board. And plus, it's got 24 channels. We use like 16 channels. So I've recognized that good is good enough for now. We can learn the basics on what we have. And even in other gear, there's always a creative solution to your problem. So Jake uses pads, and he puts them in the end of an Ableton set, right?
Yeah.
And I use a different setup. I use a guitar volume pedal hooked into my phone. Basically free because I had that stuff lying around, but it's good enough to get the job done for me right now. I can fade the pads out, bring them in, switch to whatever key I want. So use what you have to the fullest ability. Learn the basics on that, because you won't be able to use the next step until you learn those basics. But when the time comes and you've maxed out your capabilities, Jake's going to walk you through really what you should do next. And tip number 6. So if you're at the point of wanting to upgrade, here are the next steps for you. Jake.
Yeah, and before I go to tip number 6, if you guys are just tuning in and you're a subscriber on the channel, you're wondering like, who's this other guy here on screen with Jake? This is my friend Spencer Cormany. He runs at Leading Worship Well. It's a great Instagram account. I put his handle down below in the comments, but he has his Instagram account, and his mind is like a gold mine for lots of great tips for leading worship. So make sure you check that out after this stream. And let's move on to tip number 6. So like Spencer has said, use what you have, especially when there's budget limitations and there's no way possible for you to make upgrades. But then my follow-up to that is when you can and when the funds are available, and maybe you even have to be proactive in securing funds to make things happen, I highly recommend upgrade to a budget-friendly digital mixing console along with in-ear monitors. These two tools, a digital board and in-ear monitors, are going to be a huge game changer for what your band and your whole worship ministry is going to be able to do, and just really taking things up to the next level. Excellence wise, of course, like, you can still have an amazing band with an analog board and floor wedges and stuff like that, but there's simply some things that you can't do, such as, like, if you want to automate lyrics like in Pro Presenter, or your lighting changes throughout worship, you can't do that without running a click track. But you can't run a click track without having in-ear monitoring. And you can have in-ear monitoring on an analog board setup, but digital boards are going to make it way easier for you to get that set up, and for your musicians to be able to mix their in-ear. So I want to encourage you to find a budget-friendly solution, and they're out there. Like, you could get, like Spencer, you're talking about how you guys have you maybe use about 16 channels with your current mixing console. Behringer obviously makes the X32, which is kind of the most popular affordable board. I think you can get that now for under $2,000. But they also have the X32 rack, which is, the rack version of it. You need an iPad to control it or plug it into a computer, which is kind of the downside. But they also make the Behringer X32 or the X18 Air. Don't quote me on what that model number is, but you can Google Behringer X Air 18 or whatever it is, but it's a small little rack unit. And again, you can use an iPad or a tablet to control it. But the fact that it's less than $1,000 and it's a digital console, like, it's kind of mind-blowing when you consider how far this technology has come over the past few years and becoming more affordable. And then one of my most popular videos on my YouTube channel, actually the most popular video, is one on how to set up in-ear monitoring using a headphone amp and headphone extension cables. We use this for a couple of our musicians every Sunday at our church. I prefer this setup over using, like, P16 individual personal mixers because it's cheaper, and I feel like if you have the digital board for your musicians to control their mixes with their phones, it's going to be way easier in the long run. And for us, especially as a setup teardown church, it's way easier than the personal mixing devices and stuff like that. So there's just so many ways you can be creative. Of course, just explore my channel. I've got lots of tips on this, but also, let me know in the comments if you have any specific questions about finding, a particular budget-friendly setup for you guys, getting a digital board and some in-ear monitors. So I could geek out about this gear all day long. But
you could.
Let's move on to the next tip.
You could fill a whole live stream with that, I know. Maybe we'll get to that later. I saw some tech questions coming in. I wrote them down. If you have questions, guys, put them in the comments and or the chat, and Jake and I will try to keep an eye on that. So keep the questions coming in. We'll get to that after these tips. All right, number 7, church, is to don't compare but learn. I'm a big advocate for watching live streams of bigger churches, smaller churches, whatever, just live streams in general. But often the temptation for that is to compare ourselves, think that we don't have all the gear that they have, we can't do what they do, and we get jealous and we compare. But instead, I want us to learn from them instead. So don't envy them. See what they're doing. See how you can incorporate what they're doing into your leading. So ask the questions of how are they transitioning? What songs are they doing? I love to get song suggestions just from watching other people's live streams. What sort of instrumentation are they using? How are they arranging their songs? These are all things that don't require any money, but you can just learn from watching. It's good to be a student of worship leading. And there's tens of thousands of churches that live stream their services online. So it's really easy to find those things. So don't compare, but always look to learn from other churches.
Great tip. And I'm typing in the comments right now. We will be doing a live Q&A at the end of this video. Sorry, I just can't talk and type at the same time because you guys have some great questions coming in here. So continue to ask those questions. I'm looking at them. But what we'll do is we'll get through the rest of these tips real quick, and we will address those towards the end of the stream. So next tip, let me pull up my notes here.
Number
8, learn how to use a click, pads, and backing tracks. And this is not going to surprise you guys. You've been following my channel. I geek out about this stuff, but just because you're at a small church does not mean that you does not mean that you I don't know how I should word that. Doesn't mean you can't start learning how to use a click in tracks in worship. I think it's even if you're in a smaller church, you have even better reason to start utilizing these tools. It's gonna help your team grow in its musicianship. You're going to sound a lot tighter as a band using a click track. And then having backing tracks, it will fill out that sound. And, so I love how backing tracks sometimes, especially if I'm just running pads in the background, it can really free me up as a worship leader to not always have to be like sonically supporting myself with my guitar, but I can, really just focus on praying and leading my congregation during those more pastoral moments. And of course, backing tracks allow you to reproduce those sounds that we hear on the latest worship albums that are pretty much nearly impossible for us to reproduce, having all the right keyboard rigs and electric guitar effects and all those things. And then I know another common struggle we have in smaller churches is recruiting enough people. At our church right now, we don't have a bass player on a regular basis. Actually, we haven't had a bass player since we launched the church in January, mainly because, we barely have enough room to have a bass player on our stage, but also it's one of those things where it's like right now our priority, I'm really trying to focus on our drummer, our keyboardist, and my other worship vocalist, and I'm on guitar, and then we use tracks for bass guitar. So, obviously don't use tracks to eliminate the people in your band. You want as many people there playing, but at the same time, don't be afraid to lean on it for certain positions. So, those are the reasons why I want to encourage you guys to just pursue using a click and tracks in your ministry. It'll really help you, again, be able to take things to the next level. It'll really enhance your musicianship. A lot of times I hear worship leaders feel like, my band's not good enough to play with a click or tracks, or my drummer's not good enough. And sure, it might be difficult at first, but it's actually going to make them better. So give it a try, and you guys let me know how it works out for you. So that's tip number 8.
Awesome. Hey guys, if you're putting questions in the chat, I am writing them down, so we'll get to them at the end here. We've got 2 more questions to go, or two more tips to go. So keep the questions coming in the chat, and we will get to them here in a minute. Tip number 9 for leading worship in a small church is to put your songs in a singable key. I think this is the one tip that took me the longest to get right. And really, it's the easiest to fix because all you have to do is learn this one simple rule, which I'm going to share here in a second. And you can just put your song in a singable key, and you can know that the majority of your congregation will be able to sing the song. So here is the rule. The rule is you want to keep the melody of the song between a low B flat and a high E flat. Somewhere in between that range is the perfect range for congregational singing. I didn't make that up. Somebody much smarter than me figured out the average range of a person's singing voice. So between a low B flat, which if you're finding the melody on guitar is the 1st fret of the A string, or the 8th fret of the G string is an E flat. So you want to keep the melody somewhere between those notes. So whenever I'm learning a new song and I'm going to introduce it to my church, I'll sit down with my guitar, play through the song, learn the melody note by note on my guitar. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're just doing it for yourself. And then I move that melody until the highest note is below an E flat and the lowest note is above an A flat. And that puts your song in a singable key that the majority of your people in your congregation will be able to sing. And putting your song in a singable key is really important, particularly in a small church, because in larger churches, you've got all this extra volume from more instruments on the stage, bigger mains, you've got more volume. And when there's more volume, people can sing higher. But whenever you're in a smaller church, usually the overall volume is lower. So people can't sing quite as high. Like nobody's going to be eking out a high F sharp in your small group. So you want to keep it low to a comfortable range where people can sing. So tip number 9, put your songs in the right key.
So are you saying I can't sing songs in the same key as Chris Tomlin or Matt Crocker or
I'm saying
Chris
you probably
Brown?
couldn't if you tried. You probably couldn't do it.
Hey, you never know. I think as my voice has been maturing, I'm actually starting to get more comfortable with those higher notes. But like you said, it's more important to like make it singable for your congregation. your voice may sound sexy, but if nobody can sing along, it's not really worship. So make sure people can participate. Great tips there, man. Then the last tip I have, tip number 10, the final one, and then we're going to get to some questions. My final tip, if you're in a small church, you have to proactively recruit for your team. People are not going to magically just show up and be like, hey, I want to be in the band, or I'm an amazing sound engineer, I want to run sound for you, or I want to run Pro Presenter, I want to be on the setup and teardown team. You have to really take initiative in getting to know your congregation, meeting as many people as you can, and just getting them involved and inviting them to be involved in your worship ministry. Of course, it's definitely a little bit tougher with musicians because you have to be a little bit fussier, actually a lot bit fussier about who you're recruiting onto your team. Make sure they have the musical competency, the spiritual health to be on the team. But especially for some other positions, though, like putting them on the tech team or, Pro Presenter, those still require some certain skill sets that you need to vet people for. But just be proactive. Find the people. Maybe there's like an engineer in your church who would really geek out over the tech. Like when you find out they're an engineer, recruit them. Or when you meet people in a church, be like, hey, do you play an instrument? Or do you know someone who plays an instrument who might be a good fit for the band? So just be proactively recruiting folks to be a part of your ministry. They're just they're not magically just going to show up. And that wraps up tip number 10.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's 10 tips for leading worship in a small church. And thanks for joining us, everyone. Obviously, if you're here, you probably know Jake. He's from Church Front. If you're just joining and you don't know who I am, my name's Spencer Cormany. I run primarily an Instagram page called Leading Worship Well, where I post daily worship leading tips. Daily meaning every single day I put out a worship leading tip about a bunch of different topics. And I also just launched a website called leadingworshipwell.com. So I'd love for you to check both of those things out. And we are going to head into a question and answer time here. So we've got some questions in the queue. Jake, I've been writing some down. Have you been writing any down?
I have.
You want me to give you some?
I have I got the chat right here. I can see what in the live stream settings here. So, how about, do you just want to pick one each?
Yeah,
or
sure.
Just kind of go through it like that? Do you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. Let me see. There was one I wanted to hit here from Andrew Sarmiento. And he said, what are your suggestions on recruiting more volunteers onto the worship team in a small church? So I think there's a few things when it comes to that. The first is build relationships with people in your church. There's probably people in your church who you don't know are musicians that are musicians. There's always people who can sing or who think they can sing. And you can train them and lead them in that. So build relation in your church that you had no idea about. Number two, and this is the cliche one that everybody always says, but it's true. You've got to pray for it. For the longest time in my church, we were praying for a drummer because we just didn't have a drummer. And we really wanted that just to bring a little bit of extra energy to our Sunday mornings. And so we prayed, and it took 3.5 years. And guess what? Over the past 2 years, we've had a drummer who's committed to serving every Sunday. So first, build relationships. 2, pray. And then number 3 is to build the team that you want. So sometimes you got to put in the hard work, and you've got to just work with people one-on-one. Sit down with a student who wants to learn guitar and start teaching them guitar, or somebody who wants to learn drums, and just take that extra hour and just sit there and work with them musically. So those are my thoughts when it comes to recruiting volunteers in a small church. Any thoughts on that, Jake?
Yeah, well, tip number 10, I was kind of talking just about being proactive, and I think you summed that up really well, that you got to be proactive, pray, do the hard work to make it happen. So I'll move on to another question here. Mario asks, what if we have a full band but still want to use loops and a click? That's good, right? Yeah, totally. You can totally use a click track and loops. In your band, you don't have to use as many loops if you have a full band that really fills in the sound, and you're going to really benefit from just playing on that click track. It's going to keep you guys in sync better, and that's going to allow you some opportunities as well to do some production automation if you ever get into using Ableton Live, so you can automate lyrics, lighting, main stage, your preacher, whatever. You can't automate your preacher, but you can do lots of cool stuff. So that's a great question.
Good. I've got another question for you, Jake, because I know you just did a podcast on this. And Protus Matera said, what's the best tip for vocal training? So I was wondering if you had any input on that. I know you just did a podcast on that.
Yeah. I'll shout out to theworshipvocalists.com. Let me just make sure worship vocalists. I'm Googling it right now to confirm. Yeah, just go to theworshipvocalist.com, and Charmaine runs a website there. She just had a baby a couple months ago. I actually just reached out to her to do another podcast because she has a service where she'll give you private vocal lessons as a worship leader. So she'll if you go to her YouTube channel, you'll see a lot of her videos are working with people one-on-one, saying okay, do this or that, and working with them on very popular worship songs. So check that out. I know she's working on some courses. Everything I've seen from her site looks really awesome, and she really knows a lot. So just go there, start there. I don't have a lot of material on vocal training, nor is that necessarily my passion, but that's a great place to go. And you can check out the podcast, though, that I just recorded with my friend Brandon last week. It was 5 tips for leading for worship vocals or something like that. So it was one of my last videos on my YouTube channel as well. So
Yeah, I've actually run across her videos before, and they're super helpful. She's puts her, I guess she does a Skype call with someone, and she'll put that on where she's walking them through how to sing a song, and it's really in depth. It's how to pronounce the word so it comes out right, but whenever you're singing it, it's really good stuff. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, and you mentioned she does it over Skype, so it's nice that it doesn't matter where you live, you can still take advantage of her coaching.
Yeah. Here's another question, and I'll answer this first, Jake, but I'd love to hear your answer too. This is from Lemuel Oliveras. He says, can you give us one tip even experienced worship leaders need? And I was thinking about that, and the most practical tip that I always have to remind myself of, I consider myself an experienced worship leader. I've been leading worship for 12 years now. The one tip that I would give people is to just open your eyes. Opening your eyes is something that's so easy to forget. It's easy to get into a song and you've just got your eyes closed and you're into it and you're worshiping, and maybe you're talking to the people, but have you ever done the thing where you're talking and you realize that your eyes are closed, Jake? And you're like, why am I talking but my eyes are closed? I
just try to turn it into a prayer or something like that.
You just say amen at the end of whatever.
Yeah, I was praying, people. That's why my eyes were closed.
Yeah, no, but opening your eyes allows you to do two things. It allows you to connect with people. Whenever Jake and I are having a conversation, our eyes are open. And worship leading is kind of like a conversation between you and the people that you're leading. You're telling them about God, truth about God, how to worship God. So you want to have your eyes open when you do that. But then number 2, it also allows you to gauge the room and see where the people are at. And that's a big piece that a lot of worship leaders miss whenever their eyes are closed, or even if you just have your eyes buried in the music, you aren't seeing what's happening in the room. So even for experienced worship leaders, keep your eyes open. Jake, do you have a tip that you would give to even an experienced worship leader?
My tip, I touched on it a little bit on one of my tips earlier, but it was just leadership development, where you may get to a point where you just feel like you kind of figured it all out as a worship leader. Things are going well. Your team sounds good. You're pastoring your congregation well. And the next step is, no matter what experience level, you should be trying to identify other people you can equip and pour into and develop as other worship leaders. Because that job is never done.
For sure.
All right. Let's see. I'm going to find another question here. I should have been looking up one a little bit sooner here. Luke. Good old Luke, my drummer. I'm going to answer one of his questions. He asked, do you have any experience with playback by multi-tracks? If so, is it good? I did try playback a couple of years ago, and I know they've come a long way over the past couple of years. I've been meaning to actually try it out again more so I can make a playback versus prime video. It'll be kind of like Logan Paul versus KSI, boxing match.
Should make a rap out of it.
Yeah. And but it's good. I mean, I think both apps are good. They probably both have their strengths and weaknesses. I just think Prime and Playback are for the boys and Ableton Live's for the men. So it's my opinion there.
I'd agree with that. Hey, this question is from Pineapple Girl 123, and guys, if you are here and you have some more questions, keep them coming in the chat. We're going to be here for a little while longer answering some questions. So Pineapple Girl 123 asks, how would you recommend working with only a handful of musicians willing to serve and prevent things like burnout? So that's definitely a hard issue in my own church. Sometimes for some roles, we only have one person covering it. So the first step is to try to actively recruit people to at least double up on the position. Ideally, you'd have at least 3 people to serve in each role. Obviously, in a small church, that's a little bit harder. But it's definitely doable, especially like in tech and stuff. Like you can train somebody on the soundboard. You can train somebody to run tech, to run slides and lights and stuff like that. It just takes a little bit of work. And then you can also try to find more musicians for your band. So that's number one, is to actively recruit. But then to keep the people on your team from burning out is to let them know that it's okay to not be there a Sunday. Like you're going to survive for a Sunday if you don't have a bass player or a guitar player. Like you're going to figure it out, and you might need to schedule that out in advance, like 3 months out, and work for a solution where you can fill in that spot. But at the end of the day, you need to give people that rest. So that's good that you are realizing the importance of not letting your volunteers burn out. And then the other part is communicating to them how important their role is, because a lot of people get burnout just because they don't see the value of serving. So you've got to constantly keep the purpose that they're serving in front of them, the vision that they're helping to accomplish, and then, of course, thanking them regularly as well.
I got a couple comments, questions I want to address. One of them is, Troy, what's up, man? You're my favorite tech guy. I'm always going to send you my worship band rejects to your tech team. And then we got Greg. Any chance you'll do more with worship visual design, shooting background videos, etc.? Yes, Greg. I have a dream for that to become a larger part of Churchfront someday, like creating some high quality background videos for you guys. Right now, I'm trying to focus more on lead worship with Ableton and worship leader school. Shooting video, doing the stock footage stuff, it just requires quite a bit of time and traveling and going to the right places to do that. So I want to do it. It's just I don't quite have the bandwidth or manpower yet to get there. And then there was another question about music theory that I saw here. Okay. How important, Nicholas asked, how important is it for the worship leader to know music theory, read scores, music harmony? Is it necessary to go a little bit further than just know how to do a couple of chords on guitar or piano? It's a great question. I think music theory is going to be one of your best tools as a worship leader. I studied music in college, so I took 4 semesters of theory, and that's pretty much all I remember at this point. And ear training and sight singing, those were really valuable classes. If you can understand, like, I think if you could have the goal of learning what's the equivalent of the first 2 semesters of a college music program, and maybe I don't know if you agree with me or that or not, Spencer, but I think Theory 1 and Theory 2, you'll dive in deep enough where you'll really understand pretty much everything you'll ever have to know for a worship ministry context, but not too deep that you're just kind of overwhelmed. So I'd recommend finding a community college nearby that offers those classes, hopefully for cheap. Maybe your church would invest in you and pay for those, or online. I know like Berklee College of Music offers some music theory classes as well and courses online. This is something that I want to dive into with worship leader school, and I want to create a course that goes into like what's the music theory that you should understand as a worship leader. But yeah, I definitely recommend learning more music theory, but don't feel like you have to go into like the super advanced stuff of that some of the college courses are just kind of overkill for what you'll actually use.
Yeah, I'd recommend there's a website called musictheory.net. I used it a lot whenever I was starting out. It's really laid out well. They've got a bunch of lessons on there. As far as specific things to learn when it comes to music theory, how a chord is formed, that's pretty important. Like what notes make up a chord. I think that's kind of the basics, but that's pretty important to know. And then just the Nashville number system. Like that by itself will get you super far. I didn't know that for the longest time, and then I learned it one day, and it changed everything. Do you have any information on the Nashville number system, Jake? You do anything with that?
I mean, it's mainly just understanding that, you have let's say you're playing in the key of C, and the chord C is going to be your 1 chord. That's the number 1. And then the key of F is going to be your 4 chord. The key of G is going to be your 5 chord. The key of A minor, or the chord of, A minor is going to be your 6 chord. I might have completely just misled you by calling those all keys. I meant chords, right? And
Yes.
Yeah, but then it's like, okay, if you think more about music in numbers, like 1, 4, 5, minor 6, then it's going to be easy for you to transpose on the fly, so that you'll automatically know if you shift up to the key of D, okay, the 1 is D, the 4 is G, the 5 is A, the minor is B minor, or the 6 is B minor. So that is that what you mean? Because I never formally use the Nashville number system, but I think I use it all the time.
Right, yeah. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
There's a post on my, I guess it's on my website now. It's one of my favorite posts that I've ever done. It's called Nashville Number System for Worship Leaders, explained in 2,000 characters or less, because that's the limit for an Instagram post. So if you head to leadingworshipwell.com and search Nashville Number System, it explains it like it takes probably a minute or two to read and maybe 5 minutes to fully understand. So definitely check that out. Pineapple Girl 123 asked another question. She said, what's the best way to encourage frontline vocalists to be more expressive while leading? And this is definitely something that I struggle with personally, because I'm not like a super expressive person. So the first thing is, don't force it. Like if that's not who people are, we don't want fake people up on stage, like pretending to be something that they're not. So obviously you want them to be leading the way in worship, but not to the point of like just doing it to do it. So don't force them to do it. But then number 2 is you can show them examples. Sometimes my worship team and I will sit down and watch another worship team lead, and we get ideas of like, these are appropriate forms of worship or forms of expressions of worship. And then the other part is to allow people to practice during rehearsal. So you know how it is at rehearsal. Sometimes like you're just trying to get through the songs, but actually encouraging them to practice what the leading on Sunday is actually going to look like at rehearsal. So that means, like, back to the opening your eyes. That's something I've been forcing myself to do in rehearsal, is to open my eyes, because I want to practice for how I'm going to be leading on Sunday. But then back to the question, also give people permission to be expressive during rehearsal, and let them know that they aren't just there to run through the songs, but we are there to practice preparing to lead worship.
Yeah, my other tip for that is to encourage engagement, is to get rid of the music stands for the people, especially the ones who are up front leading, and require them to just memorize lyrics. I mean, I feel like for vocalists, it's pretty doable to memorize worship songs, especially after you've introduced it and you know the song, and then maybe you have a confidence monitor at your church as well. That'll help them visually just keep their eyes up, looking and engaging. So it's a great question. I think we got time for maybe just a couple more. I want to try to keep this under an hour. Let's see. There was another question. There's a question. What's better, Behringer X32 or Allen and Heath QU24? I think Allen and Heath has made really quality hardware, probably better, more reliable than Behringer. But my experience, the Behringer X32, it's cheap, but the ecosystem is really user friendly. I've really enjoyed using it in the various church contexts that I've been in.
Have you seen the Allen and Heath QU24? My
I,
friend has it.
in
It,
person,
it
I
looks
haven't.
good.
Yeah,
It's a good looking board.
yeah, yeah. I'm
It's like
looking at
the
it right now.
Jake Gosselin of boards. It's a good looking board.
Oh yeah, thank you. I'll receive that. I'll receive that
Yes.
compliment. What Daniel asked a hard question: how do I work with a team that isn't spiritually right with God? You have to have some honest conversations, and I really think that, I think we're called to have some awkward conversations with folks, and there's a biblical way of if you need to have a conversation with someone about like, hey, like some reason the life that what I see you going about outside of church isn't really matching up what you are singing about or proclaiming inside of church. Like, what's going on there? Can you tell me more? Like, just ask them questions. Don't necessarily try to be super confrontational about it. But I would ask them, if you ever have a problem with another believer, you have to like ask them one-on-one. And then if that doesn't seem to help the situation, then you got to bring in some other folks to be there with you and try to mediate the conversation. So my biggest tip is just like address problems like that, or else there could be some bigger issues down the road that you don't want to find yourself in.
Yeah, I think you can always talk to your pastor about it too. I think that's super important. Like, you don't have to handle it on your own. Like, of course you're in charge of the team, but your pastor knows the situation too, so they can give you some insight on how to handle it, especially if you're not like in full-time ministry and you're just the one leading the team. Like, maybe it's a conversation that the pastor needs to have too.
Yeah. Greg asks, Jake, what camera did you use to capture your services? I've been testing out the PTZ optics camera. It's actually what I'm using right now as well. So it's great little camera. It might be getting a little dark in here for it now that I think about it. I don't know. But,
It looks fun.
Yeah, it's okay. But PTZ optics, I have a video about that a couple videos back on the channel. All right. Let's see, Spencer, are you good on your end?
Yeah.
Any other questions you wanted to answer?
Just Nicholas just asked one. He said, what are the steps if you want to record a worship album? And I've seen that a lot lately, so I know that that's a big topic that people are interested in. I'd say number one is to actually have your own songs. I don't know. There's something about like a CD full of worship covers that makes me not want to listen to it. I don't know if that's you, Jake, but it sounds like he wants to write his own songs. So you got to write songs. The other part is to actually play them in your church, like introduce them to your church. I love it whenever you can tell that like a worship album is something that a church has actually lived with for a while. So like at my church, we do probably 5 or 6 original songs, and we've been doing them for 6 years. We haven't put out a worship album because that's not really on our radar, but like these are songs that people live with and they are our songs. So before you do it, at least for the first album, make sure that it is like your songs, like your church's songs. And then from a technical perspective, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can record it live, just out of your board. I don't know. You know more of the tech stuff, Jake. You got any thoughts on recording?
Yeah. I mean, I would say as far on the songwriting piece, just do it. Just you're gonna write a lot of crappy songs, but just kind of get over that. And like it's a craft you have to get better at. And then when you're ready to record, of course, if you want to record it live, you got to have like a digital console that can record multi-track, and you can get Pro Tools on your computer to record a multi-track recording there. And then after, you might even want to send that recording to a professional to mix and master it for you. So there's a lot of ways of doing it. You can do it on a shoestring budget, and it probably won't sound that amazing, or you can kind of plan ahead and talk to your church leadership and see if you can invest some resources into it. It's kind of all over the spectrum. I haven't dove into doing that myself. I mean, I've done multi-track recording of our services, but haven't really got to the point where I'm like, oh, I want to record a worship album. So hopefully that's helpful for you. All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks so much for joining the live stream. I want to encourage you to go check out Spencer's Instagram account at Leading Worship Well. And I want to also invite you guys to go check out Worship Leader School at worshipleaderschool.com. That's my latest project I've been working on. I've built a couple courses for it. I'm really loving it as I build them. And you can join that wait list for Worship Leader School, and you're going to kind of be a part of the process of me building this thing to help serve you guys, because I'm emailing the people on the wait list like, hey, what particular challenges do you have on this topic? What questions do you have? And then I'm using that as I build out the courses. So I really want your guys' help to make Worship Leader School amazing. And I think that's all I have, Spencer. Anything else?
No, I think that's good. Thanks for having me on your live stream, Jake. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you here, Spencer. Like I said, go follow Spencer at Leading Worship Well. And if you're new here to this live stream, thanks so much. I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel. I'm constantly putting out content about worship leading and tech ministry, all to help you grow yourself and to grow your church. So have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I'm going to awkwardly navigate to the finish live stream button right here. All right, goodbye.